Let's be honest, sweetheart. You brought nothing to this family. My mother-in-law said it while passing the cranberry sauce, the same way you'd ask someone to hand you a napkin. Casual. Practiced. Like she'd been rehearsing the sentence in her bathroom mirror for weeks and was finally satisfied with the delivery. What she didn't know was that the house she was sitting in, the one with the wraparound porch and the original hardwood floors and the kitchen she'd remodeled twice with money she didn't actually have, had been 11 days away from being seized by the bank. And the only reason it wasn't? Me. The woman who brought nothing. My name is Margot Ellison. I'm 34 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a rented 2-bedroom apartment above a bookshop on East Broughton Street that smells like old paper and lavender candles. I drive a 2016 Subaru Outback with a cracked taillight I've been meaning to fix for 7 months. I wear the same 3 pairs of jeans in rotation. I don't own a single piece of designer anything. And if you met me at a dinner party, you would never, not in 1,000 years, guess that I'm a forensic accountant who specializes in real estate fraud, that I hold a certified fraud examiner credential from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and that in the last 6 years, I've helped recover over $120 million in misappropriated property assets across the Southeast. You wouldn't guess any of that because I don't look like money. I look like a woman who shops at Target and reads too many library books. And that's exactly how I like it. Let me go back. Because the Thanksgiving thing didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the end of something that had been building for 7 years, and to understand the end, you need to understand the beginning. I met my husband, Nolan, in 2017 at a continuing education seminar in Charleston. Boring start to a love story, I know. He was an insurance adjuster. I was there for a fraud detection workshop. We ended up at the same lunch table at a Marriott conference room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and warmed over chicken. He made me laugh. That was it. That was the whole thing. He made a joke about the keynote speaker's tie looking like it was designed by someone who'd never seen a human neck, and I laughed so hard I spilled iced tea on my notebook. We exchanged numbers. 3 months later, we were dating. A year after that, he proposed on the Forsyth Park fountain steps during a rainstorm because he said he didn't want to wait for perfect weather. Nolan is a good man. I need to say that clearly because what comes next might make you wonder. He is kind. He is loyal. He adores our daughter, Wren, who's 4 and named after the bird because she screamed so loud in the delivery room that the nurse said she sounded like one. Nolan is a good man. But Nolan is also his mother's son. And his mother, Colette Ellison, is a woman who has spent her entire life constructing an image of wealth and status that is held together by nothing but credit cards, social pressure, and the absolute refusal to let anyone see the cracks. Colette lives in a 4-bedroom colonial revival on a tree-lined street in the historic district of Beaufort, South Carolina. The house has been in the Ellison family for 3 generations. It has original crown molding, a formal dining room that seats 12, and a backyard magnolia tree that Colette describes to guests as older than the Confederacy, which is both historically inaccurate and deeply telling about her priorities. The house is beautiful. It is also a financial sinkhole that has been quietly draining the Ellison family for decades. But Colette would rather sell a kidney than admit that the house costs more to maintain than it's worth. To her, the house is the family, and the family is the house. They're the same sentence. When Nolan brought me home for the first time in 2018, Colette opened the front door, looked me up and down, and said, "Well, Nolan said you were pretty." That was the compliment. That was as warm as it got. Over dinner, she asked me what I did. I told her I was an accountant. She smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to look disappointed. "That's practical," she said, and then she turned to Nolan's sister, Adrienne, and started talking about Adrienne's new boyfriend who was apparently in venture capital, which turned out to mean he ran a vaguely defined crypto thing from a co-working space in Hilton Head. What Colette didn't ask, and what she never would ask in 7 years, was what kind of accountant. She heard accountant and filed me under boring, low value, not worth discussing. She didn't ask about the certified fraud examiner credential. She didn't ask about the forensic specialization. She didn't ask about the case I'd worked on that year, tracing $8 million in property title fraud through a chain of 14 shell companies for a law firm in Atlanta. She didn't ask because she didn't care. To Colette, my career was a sentence, not a story. And sentences don't get follow-up questions. My career had started quietly, the way most interesting things do. After graduating from the University of Georgia with a master's in accounting, I'd taken a job at a small forensic auditing firm in Savannah. The pay was modest. The work was extraordinary. I spent my first year learning to read financial documents the way a doctor reads an MRI, looking not at what was there, but at what was missing. By my third year, I'd built a reputation for finding money that people had spent considerable effort hiding. Property developers who inflated renovation costs. Estate executors who skimmed from trusts. Mortgage originators who falsified income documentation. I found them all. Not because I was smarter than the people who hid the money, but because I was more patient. Fraud relies on nobody looking twice. I always looked 3 times. By the time I met Nolan, I'd gone independent. I worked contract to contract, hired by law firms and property receivers who needed someone to untangle financial knots that nobody else could reach. I worked from my apartment. I worked from coffee shops. I worked from a rented desk at a co-working space on Bull Street that cost $200 a month and came with unlimited mediocre coffee. I didn't have a corner office. I didn't have business cards. I had a laptop, a CPA license, a CFE credential, and a reputation that traveled by word of mouth through a network of attorneys who trusted me with their hardest cases. Adrienne is 2 years older than Nolan. She's tall, blonde, effortlessly put together in that way some Southern women are, where even their casual clothes look like they were selected by a stylist. She works in pharmaceutical sales, which pays well, and she makes sure you know it. Not in a crass way. In a subtle, devastating way. She'll mention her new car in the context of a story about traffic. She'll bring up her vacation in the context of a story about sunscreen. Every conversation with Adrienne is a Trojan horse. You think you're talking about one thing, and then suddenly you're inside her accomplishments, wondering how you got there. Colette and Adrienne are a unit. They always have been. They finish each other's sentences. They share inside jokes that exclude everyone else in the room. They shop together every Saturday morning at a boutique on Bay Street that sells $400 scarves. They have a group chat that Nolan once accidentally saw a notification from, and the preview read, "She wore that to brunch?" He never told me what that was. He didn't have to. I already knew. From the beginning, Colette made it clear that I was not what she'd envisioned for her son. She never said it directly. That wasn't her style. She said it through 1,000 small cuts delivered with a smile. When Nolan and I got engaged, she said, "Well, I hope you'll let me help with the wedding. You'll want it to look right." When we got married at the courthouse because we wanted something small, she didn't speak to Nolan for 2 weeks. When Ren was born, Colette visited the hospital, held the baby for exactly 4 minutes, and said, "She has Nolan's eyes. Thank goodness." She said it while looking at me. The message was clear. For 7 years, I absorbed it. I smiled. I brought wine to dinners. I complimented the house. I said yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, because Colette expected it, and because fighting her wasn't worth the wreckage it would leave in Nolan's life. He loved his mother. He hated the way she treated me, but he loved her. And I loved him enough to carry the weight of her disapproval without asking him to choose. But here's the thing about carrying something heavy for a long time. Your arms get strong. And eventually you stop noticing the weight. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just becomes part of how you move through the world. Colette's opinion of me stopped mattering somewhere around year 4. By year 5, I'd stopped hearing the insults altogether. By year 6, I'd started to pity her. Because I'd seen what she didn't want anyone to see. I'd seen the numbers. I need to explain how I found out about the house. It wasn't snooping. It wasn't intentional. It was professional instinct following a thread it couldn't ignore. In 2022, Nolan mentioned casually that his mom had refinanced the Beaufort house. He said it the way you'd mention a weather forecast. No emotion. No detail. Just, Mom refinanced the house again. Again. That word caught my ear the way a wrong note catches a musician. I didn't say anything. But later that week, Out of pure curiosity, I pulled the public property records for the Ellison house in Beaufort County. It's not snooping when the records are public. That's literally what they are.
Public.
What I found made my stomach turn. Colette had refinanced the house 4 times in 9 years. Each time, she'd pulled out more equity. The original mortgage from the early 2000s had been $180,000. By 2022, the outstanding balance was $610,000 on a property assessed at $675,000. She'd extracted nearly $500,000 in equity and funneled it into, as far as I could tell, renovations, lifestyle maintenance, and what appeared to be a series of bad investments made through a financial advisor in Charleston who I later discovered had been disciplined twice by FINRA for unsuitable recommendations. The house was leveraged to the ceiling. One missed payment away from trouble. I didn't tell Nolan. Not yet. I wasn't sure how, and I wasn't sure it was my place. The Ellison house was Colette's identity. Telling Nolan his mother was drowning financially would have been like telling him his mother was a different person. He wasn't ready for that. So I watched. And I waited. And I quietly set up a Google alert for the property address, which is something only a forensic accountant married to a man with a complicated mother would do. Now let me tell you about Thanksgiving. November 2024. Colette's house. The dining room with the 12-seat table, the one she'd bought at an estate sale in 2019 and told everyone was an antique from her grandmother. It wasn't. I'd seen the exact model on Wayfair for $2,200. But that's Colette. The lie is always more beautiful than the truth, so why bother with the truth? The table was set with her good china. The crystal glasses she only brought out twice a year. Cloth napkins folded into shapes that must have taken her 20 minutes each. Candles that smelled like cinnamon and something expensive. The turkey was golden brown and sitting on a platter in the center of the table like a centerpiece in a magazine. Colette had been cooking since 5 a.m. I know because she mentioned it 3 times before we sat down. The guest list. Colette at the head. Nolan's father, Gerald, at the other end, quiet as always, a man who had long ago surrendered control of all household narratives to his wife and now existed primarily as a nodding presence. Adrienne and her current boyfriend, a real estate developer named Trent who wore a Rolex and talked about passive income streams the way other people talk about the weather. Nolan and me. And Ren, who was in the living room watching Moana on an iPad with the volume turned up loud enough to hear through the wall.
Dinner started fine.
Small talk. Safe topics. How was the drive? The weather's been strange. Did you see what happened to the Hendersons' mailbox? Adrienne talked about a sales trip to Tampa. Trent talked about a condo development in Bluffton that was going to absolutely explode. Gerald asked Nolan about work. Nolan said things were fine. I ate sweet potatoes and said very little, which was my usual role at these dinners. The quiet one. The background. The woman who brought nothing. It happened between the main course and dessert. Colette had gotten up to get the pecan pie, the one she made from scratch every year using a recipe she claimed was passed down from her great-grandmother, though I'd seen the same recipe on the back of a Caro syrup bottle. She came back, set the pie on the table, and then she looked at me. Not a glance. A look. The kind of look that tells you someone has decided to say something they've been saving up. Her eyes were steady. Her hands were folded in front of her. She had the posture of a woman about to deliver a verdict. You know, Margot, she said. I've been thinking. About what? I said. About this family. About where we are. About where we're going. She paused. Let the silence do its work. And I think it's time someone said what everyone's been thinking. Nolan shifted in his chair. Mom. Let me finish. She held up one hand. Not aggressive. Regal. Like a queen silencing a courtier. Nolan, you've worked hard. You provide for your family. You've always made us proud. Adrienne's same. She's built a career. She's independent. She contributes. Another pause. She looked at me. But let's be honest, sweetheart. You brought nothing to this family. My son built everything you have. The apartment you live in. The car you drive. The life your daughter has. All of that is Nolan. I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because someone has to. The room didn't move. Gerald stared at his plate. Adrian looked at her wine glass, but didn't pick it up. Trent leaned back slightly, the way people do when they want distance from an explosion without actually leaving the room. Nolan opened his mouth. Mom, that's not it. Nolan. Colette's voice was firm. I know you love her. I'm not questioning that. But love doesn't pay for the roof. Love doesn't build a legacy. And when I look at what this family has, and I look at what she's contributed to it, the math doesn't work. I want you to understand what happened inside me at that moment. It wasn't anger. I'd moved past anger with Colette years ago. It wasn't hurt. I'd built up enough scar tissue that her words bounced off me like rain off a windshield. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind of crystalline, ice-cold understanding that comes when someone finally says the quiet part out loud. She'd been thinking this for 7 years. She'd been whispering it to Adrian. She'd been hinting at it to Nolan. And now she'd put it on the table next to the pecan pie and the Caro syrup recipe, and she expected me to sit there and take it. So, I did something I'd never done before at that table. I looked at her.
Not down.
Not away. Not at my plate. At her.
Directly.
You're right, Colette, I said. The math doesn't work. She blinked. She hadn't expected agreement. People like Colette prepare for arguments, not agreements. An argument she could win. An agreement left her nowhere to go. I'm glad you see that, she said, recovering quickly. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just think it's important for her.
No, I said.
I mean, the math literally doesn't work. But we can talk about that another time. I went back to eating my pie. The table stayed silent for about 15 seconds, which in dinner party time is an eternity. Then Gerald cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted coffee, and the evening limped forward like a car with a flat tire. We left at 8:30. In the car, Nolan gripped the steering wheel and said, I'm sorry. I should have stopped her. I put my hand on his arm and said, it's okay. She said what she needed to say. And soon, the math will speak for itself. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means I love you. And I need you to trust me. He didn't ask again. Because Nolan knows me. He knows that when I go quiet, I'm not retreating. I'm calculating. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my Google's alert pinged. Beaufort County had filed a notice of default on the Ellison property. Colette had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. The balance outstanding was $587,000. The house was headed for foreclosure proceedings. The lender was Atlantic Coast Savings, a regional bank headquartered in Hilton Head. I sat at my desk in my office above the bookshop, staring at the filing. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage was clip-clopping down Broughton Street with tourists pointing at the Spanish moss. My coffee was getting cold. I had a decision to make. Here's what most people would do in this situation: nothing.
Let the house go.
Let Colette face the consequences of 9 years of financial recklessness. Let the woman who said, you brought nothing, lose the only thing she valued. There would be a certain poetry in that. A certain justice. But here's what most people don't understand about me. I'm not in the justice business. I'm in the numbers business. And the numbers told me something simple. If that house went to foreclosure auction, it would sell for maybe $450,000, below market, because foreclosures always sell below market. Colette would lose the house, Gerald would lose his home, and the family would fracture in a way that would break Nolan's heart. And Ren would grow up watching her father carry the grief of something that could have been prevented. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I owed Colette anything, but because I loved the people connected to her. I called Atlantic Coast Savings on a Monday morning. I identified myself as a credentialed forensic accountant and property asset specialist, which got me transferred 3 times before I reached someone who actually understood what I was asking. I requested details on the mortgage note, the default timeline, and the reinstatement requirements. By Wednesday, I had the full picture. Colette needed $47,000 to bring the mortgage current, clear the late fees, and reinstate the loan. $47,000. I had $47,000. I had considerably more than $47,000. Over the past 6 years, working cases for law firms and property receivers across Georgia, South Carolina and North Carolina, I'd built a personal savings reserve that would have made Colette's jaw drop. I lived below my means not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The apartment above the bookshop cost $1,400 a month. My Subaru was paid off. My wardrobe was mostly clearance rack. I wasn't performing modesty. I was practicing it. There's a difference. On Thursday, I drove to Hilton Head. I walked into Atlantic Coast Savings wearing jeans and a black sweater. The loan officer, a man named Dennis who had a fishing calendar on his wall and a Clemson mug on his desk, looked at me like I'd wandered in by accident. I told him I wanted to pay the reinstatement amount on the Ellison mortgage. All $47,000. He asked my relationship to the borrower. I said, daughter-in-law. He looked at me for a long moment, then processed the payment. I asked him one additional question. If the borrower were to default again and the property went to auction, could a third party purchase the note directly from the bank?
He said yes.
What would that look like? He explained. I listened, and then I asked him a question that changed everything. If I were to purchase the mortgage note itself, not the property, just the note, what would that cost? Dennis pulled up some numbers. The note had an outstanding balance of $587,000, but the bank, given the default history and the risk profile, was willing to sell the note at a discount. He quoted me a figure. I won't share the exact number, but it was significantly less than $587,000. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for exactly one night. The next morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Felicity Park, who works out of a converted Victorian on Drayton Street and who I'd worked with on 6 forensic cases. I told her what I wanted to do. She was quiet for about 10 seconds, which is a long time for a lawyer, and then she said, Margot, you understand that if you buy this note, you become the lender. You own the mortgage. Colette would owe the payments to you. I understand. And you understand that she doesn't know. That's correct. Another pause. This is either the most generous thing I've ever seen or the most savage. I genuinely can't tell. It's neither, I said. It's math. 3 weeks later, the transaction was complete. I was now the holder of the mortgage note on the Ellison house in Beaufort. Colette's monthly payments, if she ever managed to make them again, would go to a holding entity that my attorney had set up. Colette would have no idea. The servicing company would change on her next statement, but these things happen all the time in mortgage servicing. People rarely notice. And Colette, as I well knew, did not read her financial statements carefully. If she had, she wouldn't have been in this situation in the first place. January passed. Colette's January payment didn't come. February's didn't either. The house was technically in default again, but this time, the person who held the note wasn't a bank. It was me. I didn't press. I didn't send letters. I waited, because I knew what was coming. I'd seen it in the county records. I'd seen it in the numbers. And I knew that Colette, for all her posture and performance, was running out of options. The call came on a Saturday in late February. Nolan's phone rang at 7 a.m. I was in the kitchen making Wren's breakfast, cutting a waffle into triangles, because she decided that week that rectangles were not okay. Nolan answered. His mother's voice was audible even from across the room. Not the words, but the tone.
Panic.
I'd never heard Colette sound like that before.
She was always controlled.
Always composed. This was neither. Nolan hung up after 4 minutes. He looked at me. The house is in trouble. Mom says the bank is threatening foreclosure again. She needs help. How much? I asked, even though I already knew. She didn't say. She's too proud to give me numbers. She just said it's bad. She wants us to come down this weekend. I nodded. Okay. Margot. He looked at me with something between fear and exhaustion. I don't know if I can fix this. I put down the waffle knife. I walked over to him. I took his face in my hands and I said, You don't have to fix it. I already did. And then I told him. All of it. The public records. The refinancing history. The $47,000 reinstatement. The note purchase. The holding entity. The fact that I, his wife, the woman his mother said brought nothing, owned the mortgage on the family house. I spoke for about 15 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he sat down at the kitchen table, put his hands flat on the surface, and stared at them for a long time. "You bought my mother's mortgage," he said. "Yes." Without telling me. I needed to move fast. And I needed you to not carry this until I was sure it was done. "How much?" I told him. His eyes widened. Not because the number was shocking, though it was, but because he realized for the first time how much money I actually had. How much I'd quietly earned. How much I'd saved while living like someone who barely had enough. He looked around our apartment, at the second-hand furniture, the Target curtains, the Subaru key hook by the door, and he said, "Margot, who are you?" I laughed. "For real. I'm your wife. I'm Ren's mom. And I'm a very good accountant." He pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel his heartbeat against my chest. He didn't say anything for a while. When he let go, his eyes were red. "She said you brought nothing," he whispered. "I know. And you saved her house." "I saved our family's house. There's a difference." We drove to Beaufort the next day. Sunday morning. The azaleas were starting to bloom along Highway 21. Ren fell asleep in her car seat within 10 minutes, the way she always does on long drives, head tilted sideways, one shoe kicked off. Nolan drove. I looked out the window and thought about what was about to happen. When we arrived, the house looked the same as it always did. Beautiful from the outside. The wraparound porch. The magnolia tree. The freshly painted shutters that Colette had probably put on a credit card. Gerald was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, looking like a man waiting for a storm he couldn't see, but could feel in his bones. Inside, Colette was at the dining room table. Not the formal one. The small one in the kitchen. The one she never let guests see, because it had a water stain from a vase that leaked in 2017. She was surrounded by papers. Bank statements. Letters with red printing. A calculator. She looked up when we walked in, and for the first time in 7 years, she didn't perform. No smile. No posture. No carefully chosen greeting. She just looked at us with the raw, stripped-down face of a woman who had run out of walls to hide behind. "It's bad," she said. "I'm going to lose the house." Adrian was there too, sitting across from her mother, looking shaken. Trent was nowhere. I later learned they'd broken up 3 weeks earlier, which meant the passive income streams had apparently stopped flowing. Adrian looked at me when I walked in, and for the first time, there was no superiority in her eyes. There was nothing. She was empty. Colette spread her hands over the papers. "The bank sold the mortgage. I don't even know who holds it now. Some company I've never heard of. They haven't sent any notices, no new payment books, nothing. Felicity at the bank. Well, she's not at the bank anymore, and the new people don't know anything. I'm 3 months behind. I have $6,000 in savings. Gerald's pension covers groceries and utilities. That's it. That's everything." She looked at Nolan. "I need you to tell me what to do." Nolan looked at me. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a mockingbird was singing in the magnolia tree. Ren was in the living room, coloring on the floor, completely unaware of any of it. "Mom," Nolan said slowly, "Margot needs to tell you something." Colette's eyes moved to me. I could see the resistance already forming, the instinctive dismissal. What could Margot possibly have to say that would matter here? This was a financial crisis. This required real expertise. This required someone who brought something to the table. "Colette," I said. I sat down across from her. I put my hands on the table, flat, the same way Nolan had done in our kitchen the day before. "The company that holds your mortgage. The one you've never heard of. It's called Ellison Property Holdings, LLC. She stared at me. "I don't know what that is." "It's mine. I bought the note from Atlantic Coast Savings in December. I hold the mortgage on this house." The room went so still I could hear Ren's crayon scratching paper in the next room. Colette's face didn't change at first. It took about 4 seconds for the words to arrange themselves into meaning inside her head. And then something happened that I will never forget as long as I live. Her legs gave out. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. She was sitting in a chair, but she tried to stand, maybe instinctively, maybe to leave, maybe to argue, and her legs simply didn't hold her. She caught herself on the edge of the table. Gerald jumped up. Adrian grabbed her arm. Colette sank back into the chair like someone had removed her skeleton. "That's not possible," she whispered.
It is.
"I'm a forensic accountant, Colette. I specialize in real estate financial structures. I've recovered $120 million in misappropriated property assets in my career. I paid off your default. I purchased your note at a discount. And as of December 19th, your mortgage payments are owed to me. But you stay home." "No," I said. "I go to work. I've always gone to work. You never asked what I did because you already decided I was nothing." Colette's hand was over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. Not from gratitude.
Not yet.
From the sheer, vertigo-inducing realization that the entire story she'd told herself about me, about her family, about who mattered and who didn't, had been wrong. Completely, structurally, mathematically wrong. Adrian was staring at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air. "You own our mother's mortgage," she said. It wasn't a question. It was her brain trying to process a sentence it had never anticipated. "I do." "Why?" I looked at her, then at Colette, then at Gerald, who was holding his wife's shoulder with one hand and wiping his eyes with the other. "Because Thanksgiving dinner, your mother told me I brought nothing to this family. And I decided that the best response wasn't an argument. It was a receipt." Nobody spoke for a long time. The mockingbird outside kept singing. Wren wandered in from the living room holding a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a purple horse. She walked over to Colette, held it up, and said, "Grandma, I made this for you." Colette took the drawing.
She looked at it.
And then she looked at me, and something broke behind her eyes.
Not in a bad way.
In the way that things break when they need to be rebuilt.
"Margot," she said.
Her voice was barely audible. "I owe you an apology." "You do," I said. "But not today. Today we're going to sit down, go through every piece of paper on this table, and I'm going to build you a repayment plan that won't destroy you. Because that's what I do. I fix things that other people broke." I spent the next 3 hours at that kitchen table. The one with the water stain. I went through every statement, every fee, every interest calculation. I restructured her payment schedule to something she could actually manage on Gerald's pension plus what Adrian could contribute monthly. I identified $14,000 in fees that had been incorrectly applied by the previous servicer and filed a dispute. I set up an escrow account for taxes and insurance so she'd never be caught off guard again. By the time I was done, Colette had a clear, survivable path forward, written out on a legal pad in my handwriting. Every number accurate. Every line item explained. When I finished, I stood up. My back was sore from the kitchen chair. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. Wren was asleep on the living room couch, with her purple horse drawing on her chest. Colette stood up too. She walked around the table. She stopped in front of me. And then she did something she had never done in 7 years of knowing me. She hugged me. Not a polite hug. Not a holiday greeting hug. A real one. The kind where you can feel the other person shaking. She held on for about 10 seconds, and then she whispered into my shoulder, "You brought everything." I didn't cry. I'd done my crying years ago, alone in my apartment, on nights when her words had still been sharp enough to cut. I'd cried at kitchen tables at midnight, wondering why I wasn't enough. I'd cried in my car in parking lots after holiday dinners, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I had no tears left for this moment. What I had was something better. I had the quiet, bone-deep satisfaction of knowing that I'd never needed her approval. I'd only needed my own. We drove home that evening. Wren woke up as we crossed the Savannah city limits and asked for chicken nuggets. Nolan pulled through a drive-thru without being asked. He reached across the console and took my hand while we waited for our order. He didn't say anything. He just held on. The woman at the window handed us our bag and said, "You'll have a good night." The bag smelled like salt and grease. Wren ate 4 nuggets and fell back asleep. 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten on cream-colored stationery, with Colette's initials embossed at the top. It was 2 pages. I won't share everything she wrote, but one line has stayed with me since I read it. I spent 7 years looking at you and seeing what I expected to see. I never once looked at you and saw what was actually there. That is my failure, not yours. It was the closest Colette has ever come to being honest, and I respected it more than any apology she could have given. Last month, I had dinner with Adrienne. Just the 2 of us. She asked me to meet her at a restaurant in Beaufort, a small seafood place on the water that serves the best shrimp and grits in the Low Country. She was waiting when I arrived. No boyfriend. No performance. Just Adrienne in a sweater and jeans, looking like someone who'd had a few hard months and was starting to come out the other side. She told me she'd started looking at her own finances. Really looking for the first time. She told me she was $38,000 in credit card debt and had been minimum paying for 2 years. She asked me if I'd help her build a plan. I said yes. We spent 2 hours at that table, and she didn't mention her car or her vacation or her sales numbers once. When we left, she hugged me in the parking lot and said, "I should have talked to you years ago." I told her it wasn't too late. Because it wasn't. The house in Beaufort is still standing. The magnolia tree is blooming. Colette made her January payment on time. February too. Gerald replaced the porch railing himself, without hiring a contractor, which Colette described as a miracle. Nolan and I are fine. Better than fine, actually. He tells people what I do now. All of it. At a neighborhood barbecue last weekend, someone asked me about my work, and before I could answer, Nolan said, "She's a forensic accountant. She's probably the smartest person you'll ever meet. And she once bought my mother's mortgage to prove a point." He said it smiling. I shook my head. He wasn't wrong. He just wasn't entirely right either. I didn't buy the mortgage to prove a point. I bought it because the numbers told me it was the right move. Because a house was going to be lost and a family was going to shatter, and I had the skills and the resources to stop it. That's not a point. That's just math. But if the math happened to carry a message, well, I'm comfortable with that too. The apartment above the bookshop still smells like old paper and lavender. My Subaru still has that cracked taillight. Ren still draws purple horses. And every morning, I open my laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where my whole career started, and I do the work that nobody sees until they need it. I brought nothing. And nothing turned out to be more than enough.